People who did a long time, 5 years plus in prison. What was your biggest shock of the outside world? Just money in general. You have no idea how to handle money. That takes a little time to get used to. Yeah, you can't buy stuff with honey buns anymore. 5 years for aggravated assault robbery. I was 3 months past my 18th birthday when I was sentenced. I lived in a small railroad town in south central PA. I guess one of the biggest shocks for me was how much the town had changed. The scrubland where we rode our bikes and dirt bikes is now a strip mall. My friend's driveway is now the main road through that part of town. Someone fixed up the old dive bar and turned it into a fairly popular restaurant and bar. Hell, whole developments popped up all over the place. And while I wouldn't exactly call the changes gentrification, the town certainly has improved as far as standards of living, without ridiculously increasing the cost of living. Shock number 2 was internet access. AOL, Net Zero, Earthlink, etc. were the go-tos then, but phased out within a couple years of my release as faster access from cable companies became more widely available and affordable. I interned at a private criminal defense firm. The most notable shock of any of our released clients had to be one man who in prison for 16 years. Odd amount because he was paroled as part of plea deal. He had a daughter who was just a child at the time he was incarcerated, and when he got out, she had just had a baby, his first grandchild. She didn't tell him about the pregnancy beforehand. She wanted it to be a surprise upon his release. I wasn't there when our old client met his newest family member or his now adult daughter, but when he came in a few months later, he still couldn't talk about the new baby without crying happy tears. He had a picture in his wallet of his daughter when she was little he brought with him to prison, and showed us the new picture of his grandchild he keeps with it now. I was in for robbery too. Mandatory minimum of 5 years, 10 months. One of the hardest things for me once I got out was making choices. Let me explain. In prison, you might have a two choices for shampoo if you're lucky. The first time I went shopping for hygiene essentials was at Target. I remember being so overwhelmed by the amount of choices for shampoo and having no idea which one to get. I stood in that aisle and cried for a few minutes before I just left without getting anything. When I was 15, my parents sent me to live in a cult disguised as a residential care facility for troubled teens. It was worse than prison. Every tiny aspect of life was controlled. A year later, they asked my mom to take me out. Basically they quietly kicked me out, and she sent me to an actual therapeutic residential school, with counseling and other resources. I, too, was overwhelmed by having to make even small choices. The other kids asked me what kind of music I liked. I didn't know. What to wear, what's my style? I don't know. Choose a side dish to have at dinner. Can't. It was surreal. I felt crazy. My counselor at the time said it's a symptom of PTSD. That was 20 years ago for me. I hardly ever talk about it now. No reason to bring it up. My father was incarcerated from 2003 to 2016. The biggest shock for him was technology, how much McDonald's has raised prices. LMAO. Just got out. Weirdest thing was seeing all these damn scooters laying everywhere. That's weird to all of us. I did 6 years. My biggest shock was finding out you can't do much of anything without a smartphone. Companies don't even do paper applications anymore. I bet you that some of them are pissed when they got out on drug possession for pot, to find out that it's legal in some states. For my cousin, it was the Game Boy Advance. This was a while ago, 2006 or so. My cousin, who'd been in prison for about 10-15 years, was finally getting out, so me and a bunch of the family went to pick him up, then go get breakfast at some diner. I was just a little kid at the time, so I was playing with my Game Boy Advance while we were at the restaurant. I'll never forget how much the game I was playing blew my cousin's mind. He saw it and immediately said, "Holy sh, what is that? Look at those graphics. Oh my god, that's insane." His sister, "Are you seeing this sh?" To me, it was just some Star Wars game. But to my cousin, it was the future. It's actually through video games that me and him bonded a lot. I would tell him about or show him new stuff in the gaming industry and he would tell me stories about the games he would play growing up. I occasionally work with people who've just gotten out of jail or prison. And if it's a longer stay, a weird thing I've noticed is how often they are enamored of things like Spotify. Like once a guy had just gotten out after 10 years and the first thing he wanted to do was get Spotify set up. He tried to connect through Facebook but couldn't remember his password. And although people getting out of jail are doing so much work to catch up, it's really distressing how little societal support there is if you don't have family to take you in. I went in around the first iPhone. Came out around 2014, and what disturbed me the most wasn't so much smartphones but how everyone everywhere had one in their hand staring at it. It felt very Black Mirror Twilight Zone-ish. I have done 5+ years in prison. I was mostly amazed by smart TVs, with Netflix and browsers directly in the TV, and the 4-gram internet speeds blew my mind as well. Writing this for a friend as he doesn't have his own Reddit account, so please understand this is not my story. Friend. Served 11 years in prison for armed robbery and not having a permit for a weapon. He wasn't sentenced with this but admitted to me he had assaulted one of the officers first on scene. I went with his brother to pick him up from prison and slowly we took it back to where he used to live, 2 hours away. He was always nervous and anxious. His words were, "My biggest shock probably was how much had changed. Mum and dad live on the other side of the country. I've lost all communication with all my friends but you and generic other friend name. In a month or so I came by to ask him how he was doing. It's so weird to not have to give anyone my stuff. I don't have to hide anything or worry about the consequences if it gets found. I'm guessing he sadly have quite a rough time in prison with other convicts or even the guards. I work in jail, but when talking to a lifer who was about to go out on parole, I tried explaining smartphones, which blew his mind. Then I described Pokemon Go and he thought I was just messing with him. He got angry that I would make sharp. I wonder if he's running around playing Pokemon Go now. iPads. Went in. No one had a cell phone. Came out. And you had everything in your hand. Camera, phone, internet, music, games. Got locked up when I was 12. Got out when I was 17. So there were other things, like not being in control anymore. Open spaces, loud noises, silence, friends, girls, crowds. I skipped getting an education altogether, even in prison. So I didn't socialize like normal people. Being in a school or college really made me uncomfortable. I tried to go back to school, but it was pointless. You had the internet. Kids in general were weird as F to me. I'm used to waking up people afraid of what I might do. Then I'm learning how to use the internet on my own. Non-stop jerking off and Wikipedia in between 2 jobs to pay my rent. Being a kid with no education, no support. Was hard. I had to make my own food. Sucked. I couldn't cook at all. I messed up everything. Too broke most of the time to buy food. Too young to get assistance from the government. Life was rough. Having an apartment, that was weird. I smashed everything into a corner and basically walled off the rest of the place. Eventually I stopped living indoors altogether. Can't handle it. FS with my head. I would rather live in a bed den than an apartment. But iPads were the biggest shock. Couldn't believe they were ill and that I hadn't heard of them. I spent roughly 9 years in total at a maximum security prison for some dumb decisions I made as a juvenile. Self-checkout stands at stores and wireless headphones were definitely one of those. This can't be real moments. I questioned reality, like when you cannot explain an instance and it scares you trying to cope with. Did that really happen? That's how it felt. You forget about the details of things, like the way carpet feels on the bottoms of your feet, what it feels like to shower completely alone and without flip-flops on. In prison you have a certain number of smells that you're exposed to every day. Think of them as the first page in a book, but when you get out you have the rest of the book available. It's a lot to take in all at once, with social media and everything. There's the acknowledgement of the passage of time. When I got locked up I left a lot of friends and family behind and did 3 years on my own. No visitors, no calls, no mail. When I got out it was a trip to get on Facebook and Instagram and see how everyone I was ever close to had moved on with their lives. Having kids, getting married, getting fat, losing weight, starting and quitting jobs, falling out with each other, some even passing away. People think about a prisoner doing time but don't understand that the time does them. You are frozen in it, while you're stuck in a constant loop of the same day every day. The rest of the world moves on without you. When you get home, you feel left behind. It's an anxious panic to catch up after that. I know a guy who did 2-3 years I think, and I worked construction with him. I asked him, what is the biggest thing that stands out to you now that you're free? He simply said, the fact that I'm here with you but I can physically walk over there to that field 500 meters away without anybody or any walls stopping me. I remember asking a co-worker of mine. He said first was that no one had taken his car. It sat for 6 years unmoved in the street. Tires held air and battery was dead but started with a push. Second was how quickly things had gone up in cost. Rent, food, gas, things like that. Cousin did 5 for meth and robbery. When she came out she started crying when she saw my youngest sister was almost an adult. My aunt was imprisoned for about 25 years as a political prisoner in China. When she was released she was just a gape at the cityscape and how it had changed. The smartphones. Being able to pay by just scanning with WeChat. Very commonplace there. For paying something like parking it is very convenient. All the cars. The fashion everyone wears now compared to her closet of clothes she had before being taken away so suddenly. Literally, she was kidnapped from my mom's family in broad daylight. Unannounced. In the end she took it all in much better than we all had expected. Right before the pandemic, she had just finished a 3-month vacation in Guilin with my other aunts. According to her, Guilin has changed the least. My father was a counselor in a state prison for 12+ years. He told me the inmates would often talk about wanting to feel their body submerged in water, taking a bath, swim, etc. There are only showers, so that feeling up being weightless, floating, submerged was something these men would fantasize about. This didn't personally happen to me, but I worked for a criminal justice reform group in Florida for about 1.5 years. We connected with a guy who got released from prison after 50 years. He was arrested during one of the MLK riots in 1968 and locked away for half a century by an infamously racist and vindictive judge. As you can imagine, after so much time he was struggling with a lot, but the big things were that he didn't have any ID anymore and had no way to get it. Didn't know where his birth certificate or anything was. He said, it's like I don't even exist anymore. I drive Uber and picked up a guy that had just finished 15 years for drug charges. He had only been out a few days and thought the Apple CarPlay in my car was some type of alien witchcraft. I ended up telling him to move to the front seat and let him dick around with the system for the duration. He really got into the endless music that Apple Music had to offer. I did 5 years. As I went in after 2 weeks my dad died. 6 months before I came home, my husband died. It's weird when you get out and realize time hasn't stood still. Although I know it won't, you kind of think it does. My kids were all 5 years older obviously, yet the home was still the same. It was weird after 5 years. I think if I did longer it would have blown my mind. Although reality isn't a thing in prison. My brother just recently got out after 4 years. The first thing he did was take a shower, then run his feet along the carpet in the house. He said he just had to. We asked him what he wanted for dinner and he was like, anything, but I could make us some ramen. We all declined the Cheeto ramen recipe and asked him if he had seen any ads for food he wanted. KFC has those chicken and donuts. Those look effing good. Those aren't a thing anymore. Well, okay, get me anything, I don't care. Along with that, I feel like people who were in prison for so long have a hard time making decisions. Anything we got him and asked what he wanted, it was too overwhelming to choose. All honesty, it makes perfect sense. He hasn't had a much choice in his life for 4 years, and asking him what kind of clothes he wants was hard for him. All he could say was nothing gray. I don't want to wear gray. I hope he's out for good. I can tell life outside is overwhelming at times, but eventually he'll get used to it.